So hi everyone, my name is Alexis Gravely and I'm one of the assistant managing editors for the Cavalier Daily. I'm joined today by 5 student leaders from across grounds to discuss the impact of the events of August 11th and 12th on their respective communities. We wanted to bring together representation from several organizations that were involved with the student response to the events of last summer, but we understand that this panel represents only a few of the communities that were impacted by the rallies. So thank you all for being here, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Wes Gobar. I'm a 4th year, and I'm the president of the Black Student Alliance.
Hi, I'm Whitney Skegan, and I'm a 3rd year and the vice chair of Jewish Leadership Council.
Hi, I'm Raya Al-Nasor, and I'm vice chair of advocacy for the Minority Rights Coalition.
Good morning, I'm Aya Elza here. I'm a 3rd year and vice president of the NAACP at U.Va.
And good morning, my name is Sarah Kenny and I serve as the student council president.
First question I want to ask y'all is, what was the impact of the white supremacist rallies on your community?
Yeah, I think the initial impact is obviously, I think a lot of students felt afraid coming here at first. I mean, when I was here on August 11th, I saw, and 12th, I saw a lot of people, the alt-right, and I didn't know, who was a Charlottesville resident or who wasn't, especially just first kind of coming in. And I don't think grounds have really felt the same. Just walking around, having seen the scenes of people with torches walking around saying "you will not replace us." So I think there's a sort of shock factor and there's fear. I think there's also disappointment at the university's response and just kind of many of the ways that that's fallen short. And I think in many ways it's kind of revealed. It's been very revealing. And in some part it's good to see who's stepped up and who has really moved past just kind of easy condemnations of just the rally and saying like this is not us, and people who really delve deeper into some of like the racial dynamics of what happened and realities in Charlottesville and U.Va. And that's been good. But I think the fundamentals of the things that were still wrong with U.Va. were still there. So I think that we put out our list of demands with what we want to see from U.Va. U.Va. is still expanding into the Charlottesville in ways that has effects on housing and low-income communities there, living wage. So I think there's a lot of things that we still need to address that we shouldn't lose sight of. But at the same time, it's kind of very revealing in many other ways, and it's just been a very painful time, I think, and people were very raw and very raw emotionally immediately after the rally. So.
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what Wes said and also apologize for my voice just right now. But there was a lot of fear and anxiety of who are these people? Are they still here or did they go back home to other states? Are we safe here? And then especially for the Jewish community, there's an added layer of a lot of us have a lot of privilege because we do appear to be white, and not all. There are several Jews of color, even here at UVA, but for a lot of us it was sort of a reminder that we are not always welcome, and we do always try to stand with other minority groups, but this made it even more important to try to really build those connections and make sure that we have each other's back.
So even though we're 6 months out from the events of this past summer, I can say with 100% confidence that we're definitely still feeling the impacts. What we saw this past summer was only the most visceral, violent form of white supremacy, but white supremacy permeates almost every aspect of this campus. So as Wes mentioned, the intense income inequality that's produced by this university even existing in this town, the fact that we don't provide a living wage for staff members who work here, the fact that we have a direct role in the intense violent gentrification of the city all point to that there are greater underlying issues other than what happened this past summer. And, our community really believes that it was incredibly unfortunate that the events of this past summer had to occur in order to cause reflection and introspection by this university.
Really just to mimic what everyone else has been saying, the events of August 11th and 12th have really been just a very tangible, showcase of the white supremacy that's, on this ground, and that those that feel it, they feel safe and feel that they are able to express, this violent rhetoric here on grounds is something that, is not it's a problem of the university, point blank period. It's very telling that people would, gather to rally here at a self-proclaimed liberal arts university, and with this type of rhetoric. And I think personally, for the community that NAACP serves, which overlaps with a lot of the communities that we all serve, it's a very intersectional one. I'm a Muslim American Black female, so just that in and of itself is very telling of the types of people that were impacted by the events of August 11th and 12th, and just more so, I guess, the ways in which people have reacted or commented. I think the communities that we all serve is really about the university's response to the events, and I think one main point that I really remember is that the forum and colloquia that happen in response to this is seen as some sort of appeasement tactic. That it happens, people talk about it, and then nothing is done. Seen as like this is it's a response, and it seemed like it's a very the university's job to at least put out something, but the work is twofold, and I think we've only gotten to step one, and it's important that we move beyond that to actually have some tangible results.
The first word that comes to mind is rawness. I think people have been angry and afraid, and we need to acknowledge and recognize that, as the other panelists have said, those emotions are still very real and very present, and that just because we've reached a discrete marker in time does not mean that the administration, that the student body, that the country can kind of put a bow on what happened and say that was the past. We're moving on, we're forgetting. I think that there have been great divisions in our student body among those who have been trying to forget and those who have been pushing and reminding us that no, this is emblematic of many underlying systemic issues with our university that we need to be remembering and talking about and addressing, not just today, not just at the year marker, but 5-10 years down the line as well. The lawn community has definitely suffered anxiety of any sort of demonstrations on the lawn. Individuals immediately text the group chat and say, what's going on, who's outside, that visceral response. International students having their parents look at this tiny little dot in the U.S. South and say, where did I just send my child? That has dramatically impacted their experiences here. And first-year students as well, in trying to address them in August. How do I and other student leaders work to give them a sense of responsibility over this community, but also understand that they're walking into what's become a national symbol of racist tensions in these states. So it's been an incredibly painful semester.
So what do you all think that your organizations did, or the administration did right in response to the August 11th and 12th rallies, and where do you think the response could have been better?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say about all of our communities, and this is a little bit in response to the first question, but I think one thing that I want to really hit on is the resiliency and the strength of all our communities and all of U.Va students. I just have been so amazed by how much people have been able to do and continue to move forward in the next semester in the face of this. I think Black students are just so strong and amazing, and I think all of our communities, like the fact that we're still here and thriving, and I've seen a lot of first years do amazing things, like in the face of this is great. But I think in response, in our immediate response, BSA, we put out sort of instructions about the actual rally, if people were kind of protesting what to do, and we provided people with information throughout the day. We were pretty quick in immediately condemning the rallies, providing a forum when school started for students to talk, and we we organized along with many other groups, NAACP, MRC, U.Va Students United and other groups, to organize the March to Reclaim Our Grounds, and we crafted those demands. and put them forward to the administration. I think that I would say that in terms of what we could have done better, I think that many of the things I mentioned about these sort of structural issues with U.Va and Charlottesville could have been better addressed within the demands. Whether that's living wage, which was later added to the demands, or something with housing and inequality in Charlottesville. But the point is that the responsibility isn't on us as students to make a change in response to this. The university took a few initial steps. They had the Confederate plaques off the rotunda. There was the ban on firearms and flames on the lawn. The university said that they would follow up on a restraining order for Kessler and Spencer for the University of Virginia, and that pursuit has been dropped. They said that they couldn't find any legal basis for it, which I find a little hard to believe. So I think that there's a lot of intellectual work being done. I saw a lot of, the history department held an amazing series of seminars immediately after. There was still the Commission on Slavery, so there's all kinds of research and discussions going on, but none of it touches everyday students' lives, right? So I think there's a difference between structural change and the intellectual work at the university that's being done. And I'd just like to see the university take more tangible steps to keep students safe, whether that's alerting students when this happens again, because we had white nationalists show up again on October 7th, and I have friends who live downtown, and they just saw torches out their window, and that's how they found out, right? And the university's response is you should be keeping up with local news. I don't think that's acceptable. So keeping students safe, I think making sure students understand this link between Jefferson and white supremacy and the alt-right, because Richard Spencer has very much ideologically in common with Jefferson, and they're sort of with the race-based science, and so understanding why this rally happened and putting it in proper context, and having students interact with that, I think, and then relations with the Charlottesville community after August 12th are things that I think could have been done better. So.
So the Jewish community and our leadership, our first response was really trying to figure out what our community needed. And what we found was that we really needed unity with other people that were affected. We're a relatively small community, as we all represent relatively small communities here at UVA. And so the first thing we did was we hosted Unity Shabbat, where we invited lots of communities, both other minority groups and just fun CIOs around grounds, into our building for a Friday night service and dinner. We were expecting about 50 people to show up, and 250 did. So that was a really, really cool thing. We've hosted a lot of discussions. We've partnered with every organization around this table to have different events trying to bring us together. We had a sustained dialogue event with BSA. We brought in a speaker this past week who is a Black Jewish woman to speak about her experience with intersectionality and racism and anti-Semitism. Excuse me. So I think that what we've done well is really form a community and maintain that community. We probably could have done more work with creating our own list of demands. We signed on to the BSA demands, and there were some in our community that were upset that there wasn't anything similar either coming from us or added to that one, but we as Jews don't have the same history at UVA that people of color do, and so we didn't feel that that was an appropriate venue, which is why we didn't try to add anything. From the administration, I think a lot of what Wes said is accurate. Once again, the safety of students needs to be a priority, and it hasn't been so far. I was actually out of town in October when they came back, and I was driving home, and I got home, and I had about 1 million texts from different Jewish organizations and groups saying, "Is everyone okay? Does everyone know what's going on?" And I shouldn't have had to figure that out from GroupMe. There should have been more official communication about that.
So in the aftermath of this past summer, along with BSA and NAACP and other organizations, MRC also helped plan the March to Reclaim Our Grounds and the demands that followed. Things that we did right, I think we advocated for those demands really hard at the beginning. I think we pushed, and we often didn't take no for an answer when some administrators were hesitant to meet with us. On the part of administrators, I will say that, although the ideal of student self-governance is a beautiful one, sometimes it allows them to push some responsibility onto students that shouldn't be placed on students. What we're dealing with is incredibly serious, and the fact that so many students felt alone and helpless and scared without the adults in their lives, the adults that are supposed to be leading them, providing a strong, forceful rebuke of white supremacy at the get-go, was really disheartening. I will say, and I'm going to echo a few things that Wes said, I think the pedagogical missions that have emerged from this are great, right? Like, I think you have to explore this intellectually in order to better understand why this happened, how this happened, and to prevent this from happening in the future. But on the part of safety, I think they've done an incredibly poor job. I remember receiving that email where they said, make sure you keep up with the local news so you won't run into white supremacists. And that shouldn't be placed onto students. We're here to learn. We're not here to be scared, feel helpless.
So I think what we've done well as NAACP is really just kind of to drive home the idea that, UVA is not, in terms of this type of racist rhetoric and, the people that were allowed to come onto grounds, it's not unique. And we, as an institution, are not a monolith. We can't separate ourselves from the community because of, the intellectual structures, as someone has mentioned, and Wes has mentioned, that kind of pervade the institution, and really how, the university itself, it's done, frankly, quite a lot of damage to the surrounding community of Charlottesville. And I think what we've tried to drive home is that, we cannot be, UVA is not as separate from the community as we'd like to think, and that, we've done a lot of work specifically in terms of trying just to bridge those communication gaps between the Charlottesville community as well as UVA itself and its different, organizations and such. Specifically through NAACP, to mirror what Raya and Wes had said, we've helped, draft the demands and plan the march to reclaim our grounds. And since then, we've organized and created dialogue on a couple of, very difficult topics kind of surrounding the events, as well as, things that have been happening around the country as well, maybe in terms of, like, for example, the NFL protests and things of that nature. We've met with, a lot of, intellectuals, I guess, people like, Cornell West, Stephen Green, who's the former youth leader of the NAACP, as well as Sean King, just in terms of how seeking advice and how to move forward as well, just kind of logistical things as well. As of late, we've created a social media campaign called We Are the 6%, aimed specifically towards Black students and just kind of getting the awareness, that there are Black students here, and that there's not a lot of us, and that our demographics should really reflect the demographics of the state that we are in, which is approximately 19% at this point, and at UVA we're 6%. So a lot of it is just, I think, just in short, that we've just tried to bridge a lot of, as I mentioned, gaps between the UVA and the Charlottesville communities, and just to do a lot of outreach work in that regard.
In the aftermath of the rallies of August 11th and 12th, Student Council held a town hall, and our representative body unanimously passed the Reclaim Our Grounds demands. And I think we've tried to not take center stage immediately following the events, and really offer support to minority communities and advocacy groups who were the drivers behind the demands, and really supporting them. So I think that is something that we've done that's positive. Also, coalition building across the nation. We reached out to 100 student body presidents across the country and got them to sign on to a letter that we sent to legislators, from our city councilors all the way up to President Trump, about how we're demanding more from our elected leaders to to combat the systemic issues of white supremacy and racism from college campuses all the way up to our federal government. Something that Student Council could definitely have done better is put more pressure on the administration, on our university police department. While I believe that individual actors within the administration absolutely are sympathetic to many of the changes that students want to make, as a system, as a unit, they have effectively relegated responsibility to the dean's working group, which, although I understand the arguments for why that unit needs to be small, students do not feel represented. As fantastic as our student member representative is to that group, one student is not enough to represent all 22,000 voices and give people a sense of agency and voice in one of the most traumatic representations of elements of our culture here that our students, our faculty, our administration have experienced. So that's something I'm really going to be pushing for in the remainder of my term, is acting as more of a bridge builder to really say this is not working. I understand that you might be individually on board or sympathetic, but structurally we need to ramp up pressure and opportunities for students to be heard.
Moving forward, what else do you think needs to be done in response to the events?
So I think that there's still a lot on the list of demands that we have that still haven't been met. We've talked about living wage before. There's still no solid plan to have students interact with education about white supremacy and slavery at the university. And I think not even just that, but the experience of like black students at the university. Black people at the university since its inception. Teresa Sullivan announced this new commission dealing with the African American experience after slavery. But again, the problem with these commissions do great research, but no one interacts with them. I think that we need to make a more aggressive push to attract. We just had this tuition hike come up, right? And every single administrator I've talked to is individually sympathetic to recruiting more African American students and more students of color. But the black middle class, lower classes were especially hard hit by the recession, right? So like you can't divorce tuition and this conversation of affordability from attracting minority students. That has a direct impact. This tuition hike that's coming up, that was just approved on minority students. So I think that's something that also needs to be addressed, and that's something we've raised concerns about. For some schools, it's almost I believe like double-digit increases for the College of Arts and Sciences. They kind of kept the cost down. I think we need to make more aggressive pushes to recruit faculty of color, so that students who come here can actually relate to the professors, so that we can have important intellectual work being done that changes the culture at U.Va. I think from BSA, one thing we definitely want to do is to focus more on relationships with the Charlottesville community, whether that's providing carpools to just city council meetings and interacting with community activists. And I also think laying out a clear agenda in the next year with NAACP and other organizations in the black community for the next president. Some of the things we're going to be looking at moving forward.
So I think for the Jewish community, one of the biggest things is keeping the conversation going. We have tried to make sure that the events of August 11th and 12th impacted but did not define our first semester, and we will continue to do that. So we've received support from all over the world, from other Jewish organizations on college campuses to the Anti-Defamation League, who came down to visit. And we are going to continue to have these events and to co-sponsor with other minority organizations to really make sure that the people that came here in August know that that's not okay. Systemically, I think there are a lot of things that need to change. And I think one of the biggest things, in addition to all of the administrative changes that Wes and others have mentioned, I think the culture of students needs to change, and I don't know. I think right now we're trying to figure out how to actually do that, how to make people care, how to make people listen to what the Commission on Slavery and then now the Commission for the period after slavery find and what they have to say. I think that that's really the focus moving forward.
So, moving forward, I think we need to democratize the ability to engage in advocacy for a lot of students. As I mentioned earlier, many students do feel helpless and lonely, and I think we're part of a select group that gets to have access to administrators. We get to have these conversations on a daily basis. We've sort of had this cathartic experience that other people didn't get to experience. So I think a recognition of that and incorporation of that notion, right, to ensure that our peers can have the opportunity to voice how they feel and what they think. Moreover, I think there's been a paltry recognition of the importance of queer people in this movement. When white supremacists came, they attacked black students, they attacked Jewish students, but they also attacked queer students. And, this is a historical, pivotal moment for queer bodies to be a part of the resistance. And I think going forward, all of us need to incorporate them more into our advocacy. We need to listen to them, we need to work with them. And so that's something that the Minority Rights Coalition is going to prioritize going forward. In the future, we're creating a third century action plan for the incoming UVA president, Jim Ryan. And the document will be incredibly ambitious. It's going to incorporate ideas from increased merit-based scholarships for underrepresented and underserved students, because that's the biggest barrier to getting into to coming to this school. Other than the culture definitely we need to address that. But if you can't afford this school, you're not going to come. And oftentimes it's underrepresented, underserved, middle-class, out-of-state students that suffer the most from lack of money. Moreover, we want to include things that address the environment, right? Divestment is a minority rights issue as well. Communities of color are incredibly hurt and impacted by things that Dominion Energy are doing in the state of Virginia. And also in this document, we want to include things that address sexual assault, because that's a minority issue as well. For far too long, it's been a white woman's issue at this university, and that's something that needs to change. So going back to what I said at the beginning, so we want to address all these forms of systemic oppression and marginalization in order to create a community where the events of this past summer could have never happened.
I think Raya kind of hit the head on the nail with that, especially in terms of the incorporation of queer bodies, especially queer bodies of color. It's no secret that, a lot of black national advocacy groups, have been headed, and many of the leaders have been, black queer bodies. So it's very important that, we incorporate this this group of people, because, they're all over. Sorry if that makes any sense. They're so ingrained, I guess, into our culture, and yet they are, some of the most underserved, underrepresented people, and, so much violence is, I guess, performed towards them, and, things of that nature. So it's just really important that, we incorporate, as many people as we can in terms of serving them. As NAACP, we're just trying to not only just increase, our numbers and, those that are in the, I guess, privileged elite of our exec and that can be involved in our group, just to increase the magnitude and our reach, I guess, in terms of, who we can actually serve and how we can serve them to the best of our ability. As per the role of NAACP, what needs to be done moving forward in terms of our scope and our reach is increase the amount of students that we can reach and that we can serve. And it's very important, I think, to involve those that might not be privileged enough, to interact, I guess. There's also a stigma at UVA, I believe, in terms of our kind of competitive culture that we have here, is that, if you're not, over-involved, you're under-involved, and there doesn't seem to be an in-between, that a healthy in-between that students seem to feel the need to choose between, being involved in advocacy groups, but also, studying for exams and things of that nature. So I think something needs to change, and we don't know exactly what that is yet, but just in terms of how students can interact with these different advocacy groups and don't feel, it has to be a major choice whether or not, they can be involved or whether or not they, can be here for their purpose, which is to learn.
Moving forward, We absolutely are going to continue pushing for education on white supremacy, racism, and slavery at this university, whether or not that's in the form of a required class or providing a curriculum that is cultivated from the work of many of our professors, community members, and students that professors can take on for a semester and make their own. We need to increase accessibility to education and history at a truth-seeking institution. This needs to be core to a university student's experience, to understand the place, the history, the location in which they are standing, in which they are learning, in which they are interacting. Moreover, we need to pursue a better alert system, and I'm happy to say that the university administration is working right now to integrate a new app that a lot of other universities use called LiveSafe that will give us more flexibility beyond the Clery compliance guidelines to alert our students as to events that are happening on and around our grounds, so that a student message about something such as Friday night's events could have been distributed across the student body rapidly in a way that our current infrastructure does not allow. And this is absolutely critical to students feeling safe, and if they don't feel safe, they cannot learn. So this is a true priority. Moreover, we are excited to partner with BSA and other student organizations to get bodies in city council meetings, organizing carpools, making a huge substantial effort. This is a requirement for every member of student council to attend a city council meeting each semester, and I want to work with other organizations to have a stronger presence there, as many organizations already do. I think in this past semester, we've had to triage a bit from the student council perspective concerns of our students here, but that is not to say that the Charlottesville community and the University of Virginia are not inextricably intertwined, and that we need to do a better job tending to the relationships and dynamics between the two entities and our entity as a whole. Additionally, I believe that we need to address the challenging and messy issue of speech on our grounds, the limits of free speech, protected speech, hate speech. We need to have robust conversation about what that looks like. Our university is struggling along with universities across the country to figure out how to devise policies and procedures to address outside speakers, inside speakers, and ensure that this is a dignified climate for student learning. And finally, I believe that we need to lobby extensively for accessibility to this university. I'm going to Richmond with student council members on Wednesday to lobby delegates and get some face time with hopefully top leadership in our Virginia government to say that we need to make sure that at the University of Virginia, students from all socioeconomic backgrounds have access to this incredible public education that is our founding charge to educate the next generation of citizen leaders, and that cannot be a classed kind of experience in the way that it is right now. So putting substantial pressure on those individuals is something that my council is going to be taking very seriously in the next few months.
Okay, so before we run out of time, we wanted to get to at least one of the questions submitted by students via Google form ahead of today's panel. So one student asked, how does intersectionality play into your organization in terms of managing multiple identities one person may hold that may have been targeted on August 11th and 12th?
I think, as Aya said, intersectionality is extremely important because there are Black queer students, there are Black Muslim students, there are Black Jewish students, there are Black female students who are all and who are all affected in different ways by this event. And I think that personally, I think BSA probably could have done a better job of directly speaking to the experiences of each of these groups. I think it's very easy to turn these things into white-black issues, but they were yelling, "Jew will not replace us." And when I was there on August 12th, I heard slurs against every single group that you can imagine, and I saw signs targeting everyone who wasn't a white male at the rally. So I think white supremacy is something that harms us all, and I think it's something that's even harmful to white men spiritually and just in many other ways. So I think that's something that we need to, as an organization, we had a lot of intersectional events last year, and I think that's something that we fell away from. So I think that it's important to uplift the voices of Black women, of queer Black people, of just different marginalized groups within the Black community, because so often I think Black men just take up so much space and sort of suck up the air. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that front. I think it just affects some people more deeply than others, and I think some people have more have had more of a space and a voice than others since August 12th, and that's something I think we should all work on.
So I think intersectionality is one of the things that the Jewish community has done extremely well this past semester. Almost all of our events focused on intersectionality and just community together. So the event we had this past week, we brought in U.Va McCoy, who is the CEO of a educational group about intersectionality in Chicago. She's a Black Jewish woman who has grown up around other Jews of color, and so she has a very unique perspective compared to a lot of the white Jewish students here, myself included. I think, in general, we definitely need to do a better job of including queer students in our intersectional conversations, but we've definitely made time and space for students with multiple identities to come together, to dialogue, to hear from others, and we will continue to do so moving forward.
So the Minority Rights Coalition is comprised of 8 constituent organizations, which include groups like the Black Student Alliance, like the Asian Leadership Council, like the Muslim Student Association. So MRC is grounded in this recognition of intersectionality, and through it, we acknowledge that our differences allow for our advocacy to be comprehensive, to be nuanced. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we're creating a third century action plan that is going to be ambitiously comprehensive in nature, and we're going to ensure that all identity groups are involved in the creation of the document. I think going forward we can always do a better job of ensuring that our groups recognize the differences and the different social locations and social categories that other students occupy. I think the work is never done in trying to ensure that your advocacy is truly intersectional.
Yes, as per the community that the NAACP serves, particularly in terms of Black students, I think it's kind of a given that Blackness is inherently intersectional. I think we could do definitely a better job in addressing the different types of intersectionality that we have within our organization and the communities that we serve. But I think it's something that's sometimes taken for granted within a lot of our groups. I think I'm speaking specifically for NAACP here. We focus mainly on the idea, that the unifying factor of Blackness, but the nuances that are available and that are present within our groups are they're very visceral, they're very tangible, but it's also something that we take for granted, and that's something definitely that we have to address to ensure that students that are interested in joining the organizations or at least having any type of affiliation feel that there is ways that they can relate, people that they can relate to, and understanding that there is not just one type of person that is being served.
I appreciate this question for its recognition of the nuance and distinction, the really important distinction between an artificial narrative of unity and showing up for one another, and how different communities have been impacted and the depths by which they have been impacted. I think it would be wrong to force a kumbaya, we all are feeling the exact same thing narrative upon any student group, upon this university. That is deeply problematic, but what I appreciate about an intersectional approach is that it is at the core of recognizing and acknowledging one another as humans first and foremost, and validating the experiences and emotions that each individual, each community is feeling, regardless of what those feelings may be. I want to echo Wes's point that white supremacy harms us all, but that in order for our university to move forward together, we have to show up for each other's communities and organizations. This means going to events that might be outside of your norm or your comfort zone. This means talking to people that you might normally not talk to. It means getting uncomfortable, but in doing so, we are validating experiences that are not our own. We are learning from each other. We are being in community with one another. So I truly believe that intersectionality is at the core of how we move forward respectfully.
I think just to mirror a lot of what everyone else has said, and I think Raya pointed to this specifically, is that, the work is never done. It's a constant antagonism that, just continually has to be addressed, and it's not something that I think, as you mentioned earlier, you can slap a bow on and move forward with. Moving forward is important and it's great, but it's also something it's very trite at this point. We must move forward. We have to put the past behind, and that's something that especially disadvantaged bodies of color, we cannot do, because that invalidates the historical experience, as well as the continual legacy of the university and how it interacts with these different histories. So it's very important to understand that where one head is cut off, like 3 more grow in its place. It's important to just, I think all of us being here is a testament to the fact that we're not just gonna let one thing happen and kind of run with it. Just it's a constant antagonism, a constant work, and it's something that I think, as all of us being here know and are aware of, is we're willing to do. We're willing to sacrifice time, whatever, just in service to others, and that's the most important thing.
I just think it's important to really understand that people on August 7th and 12th were there because they were afraid, and they're afraid of losing a majority white America. You Were Not Replaced is the most obvious example of this, but I think in terms of the things they said specifically to us, to kind of protesters they perceived as race traitors, these issues are intersectional because white supremacy is policy. So the Trump administration on immigration, right? I've had a good conversation with someone the other day about African undocumented people. So this is so these issues. People will say, oh, well, I've seen people say, why should black people care about Dreamers? Which is actually ridiculous. But that's a very tangible reason, I think, because these are policies that will change the composition of America, and if all of us are here, college students fighting to change the culture, that's not just one unifying previously majority white culture, but changing it so that it's truly reflective of what America can be and what it currently is right now. That's what the alt-right doesn't want to see, and that's what they're afraid of. So I just think it's really important because it's kind of a matter of survival that we all sit together. And then also I just think this is a bit less serious, but I think that our relations with intersectionality at UVA are very transactional. It's sort of, I will co-sponsor your event and I'll co-sponsor this one, and you kind of go to one event. And I'd just like to challenge all of us to deepen our social circles and to deepen our personal interactions. And some of the work you can do is just as simple as just reaching out and making new friends and having harder conversations.
So that's all that we have time for. Thank you all so much for being here and joining us for this panel.